Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name's Steve, and today we will go through a recap of a pick five, sort of the games from this last Sunday. I did have a recap of the Kansas City Chargers game on my Saturday morning special that I did, so you can always go back and see that in the final third of the video that is time-stamped as well, easy to find. Other than that, I want to quick thank all the new subscribers. I think I've doubled my subscriber count in the last week, so 6 to 12. Woo woo! It's something, and I definitely appreciate it so very much, so thank you guys. And thank everyone who came out on Sunday for some start-sit advice. Had a much better showing this week, so that was awesome to see. And I believe I hit somewhere around, let's say, 70% or so of those start-sit calls. So I hope you weren't on the bad receiving end of any advice. Like I said, we'll do a pick five here. Today's episode's just right here up at the front. Let you know there are timestamps that you can just jump to any of the matchups if you wish. They are Miami versus Baltimore, Jets versus Cleveland, Seattle versus San Fran, Houston versus Denver, Arizona versus Las Vegas. I could talk about all of the games. I have things I want to talk about in all of the games. I just don't have the time for that. It took way too long to do all of the games last week. Some quick news updates that have come through from the games so far. First up, tight end Dalton Schultz received good news this morning from an MRI. Damage to the right knee could have been more substantial. I believe he had some loosened ligaments, if I had to guess. So it doesn't look like that is anything too long-term, but it does look like there will be some sort of absence from the field for Dalton. So just be prepared to be losing him for a little while at least. News on Michael Gallup as well for Dallas. Once he is cleared to play, he will be on a pitch count, so be aware of that. Mike Evans has been suspended one game, and he will be appealing that. And then James Conner will be, his injury is not considered to be serious or long-term, potentially short-term though, and we are covering that game, Arizona, so get a little bit more to that running back situation there. Let's hop to it, starting out with the Miami versus the Baltimore game. Massive game by Tua. I was fairly high up on the potential this week for him. He definitely, obviously, exceeded that. So really encouraging sign. I think the biggest thing for me, you're not going to be expecting this from Tua every single week, that's for sure. I actually have their schedules so we can kind of get a good idea of how many good matchups there are and where they lie within the season. But very encouraging. I assume Tua's still out there on some waiver wires, so go pick him up. He's proved that he can utilize these weapons at the NFL level to a high output for fantasy reasons. So that is excellent. Lamar also looked, I think, as good as he has looked since prior to last season, basically. And so that's a good sign for that offense. And as they get J.K. Dobbins back, that will be helpful. We'll quick go through that. So, don't worry about holding on to any running backs other than J.K. Dobbins for Baltimore. Gus Edwards would be interesting to start to be thinking about, I guess, after week 3 there. If we get any kind of update on that, that would be cool. As you can see, Lamar got a lot of rushing yards in this game. For his health reasons, you don't want him running that much, but for fantasy, it is great. And this offense in general, I think, will be a lot better and be able to win games like this, potentially at least have a better chance at it once J.K. Dobbins is back. And as far as J.K. goes, I was saying not to start him this week, even though I had him fairly highly ranked. And I believe I'm going to flip that this coming week. I think he's going to come out, and the reason that they withheld him this week is because they didn't feel comfortable giving him a full workload, and I think that's pretty much the only way that he plays is if he has a more full workload than not, at least a Baltimore type workload. They always work in 2 to 3 backs to some extent. I'm going to be confident with JK when he comes back. Still obviously risky. Then the running backs for Miami, Actually, before we get to this, I want to take a quick victory lap here on the Rams, Jags, and Falcons backfields. Since I will not be covering those, Miami's backfield I will also consider to be a victory lap as far as my preseason types of thoughts and maybe sometimes some more recent thoughts on those backfields to different extents. That brings us to Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds. I don't trust Chase. I didn't trust Chase already, and I really don't trust him now, especially if that pass game of Miami is clicking. Then yeah, good luck. I will say Tua maybe didn't look as good as his stats looked here, but that's part of the awesomeness of having the weapons that he has. They can help him look a little bit better along the way. As far as Raheem Mostert goes, you have yourself a valuable bench guy that for now, you hope more weeks will look like this. I do want to see the snap share between Raheem and Edmonds. From what I understand, it was just over 50% for Raheem Mostert and just under for Chase Edmonds. So the snap share looks a little bit different than the actual usage. You can see they each had 3 targets. Raheem Mostert making a little bit more of that this week as far as his efficiency with those targets went. Raheem Mostert's the guy I want. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, what is there to say? That is awesome. As far as Mike Gesicki goes, it's not like he had a huge amount of the workload. That's exciting. If he is somebody that you're holding on to, you're obviously not dropping him after this week, but he is still just another tight end, and I don't think he's one of the better ones. And I also would have some concern if part of the reason that Gesicki had this game, not like this is something crazy, has to do with Cedric Wilson being out. Does he come in as a big slot kind of guy in that situation? Maybe that could be something to keep an eye on if we get more examples of that throughout the season. Is there some sort of correlation there? I think that might be a possible correlation. Let's look at the Miami Dolphins schedule quick. So going into next week, we have Buffalo. The week after that, Cincinnati. Both high upside type matchups. Buffalo with a much more daunting matchup for quarterbacks than Cincinnati, but still, who knows what we'll think of Cincinnati after next week. Might be something different. Then we have some, who knows with the Jets. That's looking like they might be able to at least keep up with teams to some extent on offense. And then Minnesota, another nice upside game, not so much with the Pittsburgh. Detroit, similar to the Jets, maybe more so. And then looking too far ahead, leading up into the playoffs, a few good matchups here with probably the week before most people's playoffs there against the Chargers. That is not a... I don't think that's going to be a good matchup specifically for Miami, but who knows what kind of injuries could happen by that point anyways, so we won't dissect that too much. But just like the Bills, it's one of those things where could become a shootout, just like this week against Baltimore. And then, of course, Green Bay in there. So, yeah, not expecting these defenses to be slouches, but expecting this offense to be good enough to put up some fantasy points, at the very least. So, I think all in all, a pretty Tua-friendly schedule throughout this season, liking especially the short term and the long term, the little bit of a lull there in the middle. Then we talked about this run game. We talked about Lamar. I don't think there's anything more to add there. The real questions come to, so Bateman for number 1. I consider yourself a little bit lucky with these first 2 weeks, but Bateman may also be a guy who's just going to thrive off of some sort of efficiency, especially once J.K. Dobbins is back, where he might overproduce compared to what you would expect for the amount of receptions that he has. He is the number 1 wide receiver to have for this team, and I don't think that there is a wide receiver 2 worth having. The closest thing to that, it looks like, might be Isaiah Likely. I liked him actually coming into this week, not necessarily as far as like a start, just as far as doing better than last week. And so he is a guy to keep an eye on, but there's really never enough opportunity in this Baltimore offense for a third receiver to be consistent enough to want to play. The Duvernays, the Likeleys, basically those two are the only ones that in a pinch you're thinking of playing, at least at this point in the season, and Mark Andrews did what we drafted him for. I apologize if I had myself covering up some of this on the last screen. The important stuff's mostly on these left stats, though. So let's move on to the New York Jets versus the Cleveland Browns matchup. Joe Flacco, once again, a lot of attempts in this game, in the passing game, and that's probably something that we can expect for the Jets this season. So that is good for these pass catchers of this team. Corey Davis gets a little bit lucky, but there's one thing about long receptions is I don't think they're complete luck, always at least. Sometimes it's when you have Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson running some of those deeper routes and whatnot, I think that can open things up for a Corey Davis on a deeper slant to just have nobody behind him, because the defense is focused on other guys. He's a borderline back-end receiver still for me. Obviously, good fantasy point total this week, but the usage was not the same as last week. And with the emergence of Garrett Wilson in week 1, are we buying that? We're going to buy it enough. It's not like he didn't have, I think it was like 9, 8, and 7 targets for these 3 last week, or 8, 7, and 6. And I think Wilson was the lowest of those, if I remember correctly. No, maybe Elijah Moore was the lowest of those 3. Awesome week for Garrett Wilson. Obviously not going to happen every week. Could even be the best week of his year. But he was one of the consensus top 2 wide receivers coming into the draft. Of course, not everybody felt that way. And Drake London was the number 2 for some, usually Garrett Wilson or Jameson Williams being the number 1, but Drake London's biggest thing was he had the biggest variance as far as what people thought of him. There were some people that had him back as like the 7th, 8th, 9th best wide receiver of the draft class this last season. So, consensus top 2 with Garrett Wilson, meaning lots of pedigree, meaning we can buy this to some further extent than if it was a 6th round pick or a Donovan Peoples-Jones in week 1. He should not be on the waiver wire after this week. And even if next week isn't great, there should be enough passing going on in this offense that he's worth holding on to as he develops. Elijah Moore, further concern for him, really 2 not great weeks. 2 weeks where I think he's had the lowest fantasy point output of the 3. He's really talented. He does not have quite the same pedigree of Garrett Wilson. I'm still hanging on to Elijah Moore. We'll just put it like that. And then as far as Tyler Conklin goes, well, let's just compare him to a tight end we have over here in David Njoku. Another nice amount of targets for Conklin. Didn't turn out into the most fantasy points in the world unless you're in full PPR, so definitely a full PPR guy. And as far as half or non-PPR, I would still put him in that David Njoku type range of guys with the Cole Kmets of the world, and he probably jumps to the front of that group. He's had some great usage these last few weeks. So, at least until Zach Wilson's back, I like Conklin. Now, we're getting to the big question marks. Breece Hall, Michael Carter. So, Breece Hall had a touchdown this week. Definitely helped his fantasy points. I really want to see the snap share between these two and see what kind of changes there were. I think the biggest concern for those running backs would be Ty Johnson. Ty, right? It doesn't show on my screen either. I believe Ty Johnson got some amount of snap share, and you can see some amount of targets and usage here too that just muddies the waters more. Not lovely. I do believe at the very least Breece Hall has made an argument this week that it's like he might force the Jets into a hot hand approach. We still need to see more. I'm not loving trusting Breece Hall, but hey, he's done okay for fantasy owners in these first 2 weeks if anybody did end up having to start him. And in case I didn't go over it, just that you see Michael Carter with 5 receptions this week. So I don't know what to tell you with them. Let's move on to this is pretty easy. So Jacoby Brissett, this is how Cleveland Browns are going to be wanting to play their games, how they're going to want to win their games, and I don't think that they'll deviate from it pretty much regardless of what the scores of the game are, even going into a late or an early deficit against teams. They're just gonna feed these guys the ball. And then, of course, the big thing here, Amari Cooper. I still think that he's a big time boom or bust guy, as we've seen in these first 2 weeks, but very, very helpful sign to see this game after a disappointing week 1 there. You just have to live by the sword, die by the sword for Amari Cooper. Hopefully for you owners, it's more of this than it was last week. Super promising to see. As far as tight end David Njoku goes, it's nice to see the 5 targets. That's the only thing I can say. And the last thing here would be Donovan Peoples-Jones. You can drop him if you had him picked up. Let's move on to Seattle versus San Francisco. This is what we expect from Seattle. This is how we expect their games to look. I was very much warning people not to play Rashad Penny, and this was the reason with Kenny Walker coming back. I would just go ahead and not waste a week here and say that Rashad Penny is droppable in my book. I would expect Kenneth Walker, to take over more of the workload. From my understanding, the snap share count looks something like 30% Rashad, 30% Walker, and like 40% Homer. Hopefully for Kenny Walker owners, because Rashad Penny's not the future of this offense. Just quick on Rashad Penny. He's not. You don't have to drop him. He's in a group of players who are solid-ish backup running backs to own, as in they take over. You know what you're going to get from them once the starter goes down, or if the starter goes down. So if Kenneth Walker goes down, Rashad Penny suddenly has some, pretty good value, whatever value the starting running back of Seattle offers you. Probably not a whole lot better than like a Dameon Pierce's value or something around there. Hoping to see at least a 60, not necessarily next week, not expecting it quite next week yet, but within 2 weeks, at least a 60-40 type of workload, and maybe Kenny can get into a 70-30 situation as the season goes along if he can be more efficient. And here's part of the reason why I'm not really quite expecting it next week and expecting Rashad Penny to still be a factor at least for one more week, is that Kenny wasn't incredibly efficient in this week 1 game. And I would say one more other nice thing about Kenny Walker, at least here, to maybe give some hope towards him being able to be a 70-30 split guy. He did get 3 targets here. Didn't make much of those targets, but he showed some sort of trust from the quarterback to target him, so that's always helpful. DK Metcalf, disappointing game. We're going to have some of these this year, and I think we've started off with essentially 2 of them. Maybe last week was a little bit better, right? But there was a big play that got called back on a holding play that doesn't show up here in the stats. So DK, there's no reason why you can't have a Tyler Lockett week some weeks too. Nice week from Lockett, but I think Lockett and DK are in the same-ish conversation of you can't really rely on them week in and week out, but at least in the case of DK, you're probably playing them unless you're loaded at wide receiver. And Noah Fant, whatever the case, just I don't know why you had him in the first place. I really don't even put him in that conversation of tight ends that are keep your eyes on. I don't like him this season in this offense with that quarterback. San Francisco's really easy. Unfortunately, Trey Lance went down with a broken ankle. I can tell you I felt that one because I have broken my ankle and I could see it after the play. Just kind of dangling there, and that's what happened to mine once. I don't think he quite broke both bones clean through like I did, because he was able to put some weight on it, and mine, that's literally how it felt inside of my ankle. I could not stand on it, or the bone would punch through my skin. So that is unfortunate for Trey Lance. I really wanted to see this offense with a rushing quarterback like Trey Lance, despite my criticisms of where he's currently at in his career as far as accuracy goes. I think this offense could be dynamite with a Lamar Jackson-esque type guy there. But unfortunately, we will not be able to see that. He is out for the season. Jimmy Garoppolo is the starter. This is why they held on to him, or at the very least didn't get rid of him for potato chips. We're back to where we were last season for this offense. So this is an upgrade to all the weapons for fantasy reasons, and I think the biggest upgrades go to Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. I'd feel a lot better as owners of those players. Jeff Wilson had a good, solid showing here. That's probably something that you can expect. The concerns are, you got Tyrion Davis-Price with a very inefficient game. Still got 14 attempts. And there were some rumors pregame that both Tyrion Davis-Price and Mason Jar, I can't remember his name, were going to see some work. I would expect there to be maybe a hot hand approach at the RB2 position. Deebo Samuel getting anywhere from, that's probably the low end with 4 attempts, 4 to 8 rushing attempts a game, and Wilson just taking over that lead role. So yeah, it was a good week for Wilson, though. A couple targets there. That's about what you can expect from him, 2 to 3 targets a game. Moving on to Houston versus Denver. So, start off with the running back here, Dameon Pierce. Very much what we were hoping to see week 1 here. So, much better with the attempts. 0 attempts from Rex Burkhead. Rex Burkhead still did get in there on passing down type work, third downs. It'd be great if Dameon Pierce could somehow take over some of that work. Dameon Pierce on this offense is a flex option, especially like through the bye weeks and whatnot. He was much more efficient this week. So good signs. Unfortunately, this Houston offense looks like my greatest fear without John Mechie. I really thought that John Mechie was going to give this offense somebody in that short to mid-range in order to help make like Nico Collins not have to get 9 targets. I think Nico is a guy you would want to be more in that 5 target range with just very efficient stats, some big pop plays to really open things up. And John Mechie being that guy and the short to intermediate routes, helping to just open up that offense, make this running game all that more efficient, make this team just efficient enough to where they're not punting the ball so much. But they don't have that, and I did have some hope that Brevin Jordan down here could bring a little bit of spice into that short to intermediate range for them, but they just don't have that. They clearly know it, bringing out 2 to 3 tight ends on as a regular enough formation. Not great for a highly efficient run game, having everything so close to the line, very 1950s. So yeah, yuck there. Brandon Cooks could have had himself a much better day. You love to see the 10 targets for him, like so. Since there is no John Mechie, you love to see the 9 targets for Nico Collins. So I would say Nico Collins is back on my watch list, or if you have him and you like him, you don't need to drop him, whereas I was probably saying go right ahead and drop him last week. Fantasy-wise, this week was a little bit more friendly overall, and Brandon Cooks owners, don't worry. He dropped a touchdown. Not going to do that every time. Shows you how close the Denver Broncos were to losing. So, this not a great start to the new regime of Denver to Russell Wilson. I really thought Russell would be a safe quarterback that you could throw in there when your starting guy had a bad quarterback matchup or was injured. But man, not a great start here. I do expect they have the weapons there in Denver. There's an update. I think I missed Jerry Jeudy. It doesn't look to be serious or long term for his injury. No broken ribs. Yeah, that's concerning though for the short term at the very least, not having Jerry Jeudy, because otherwise we have KJ Hamler's not back yet. I think that will help this offense having KJ Hamler, but didn't use that in week 1. And otherwise, we have Kendall Hinton and Tyree Cleveland, who's actually a prospect that I liked, but he just hasn't turned out in the NFL, at least so far, and I think he's on year 4-ish. I liked Melvin Gordon a lot this week. Sorry, I think that's one of the calls I got wrong. It was a 70-30 split for Javonte versus Gordon, so that does help clear things up potentially a little bit for Javonte Williams owners. That's better for them. But this offense doing what it's doing is not. So obviously Courtland Sutton, you're already playing him probably every week. This was nice to see. Albert O, I got wrong. Totally thought this would be a good week for him. Thought he would be one of the deep targets for this offense to help not keep everything so close to the line, but until they get things figured out, it just looks really, really sluggish there. And the rookie head coach is looking like a rookie head coach right now. If you have a Melvin Gordon, like, believer, lover in your league that you know of, he would be somebody you could try to trade. Javonte, just because of the perception of this offense at the very least, you're probably getting the worst value that you could get for him after this week. So I wouldn't really think about trading him right now. And if you're a person who only likes to have one quarterback and Russell Wilson's your quarterback, there are some guys out there that you could probably go for over him. So let's finish this off here with the Arizona Cardinals versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Another late comeback game and a series of exciting finishes for the early games on Sunday. I expressed a lot of concern for Arizona's offense. And despite the ending fantasy points and box score and what they look like, I am just waiting for a 6-point game from Kyler Murray like next week. This was not pretty. All of these attempts here, or all but one of them, don't recall for sure, came in like the final 2 minutes of the game for Kyler Murray. They are desperately missing any kind of true number one receiver and playmakers on this offense, and they do not have a very creative offensive coordinator who he is like very regimented in how he calls the plays and how he executes his play calling. I don't know that I shouldn't. I do believe there's some creativity on the actual plays themselves. It's just the implementation is very rigid. They need to let Kyler Murray run more. Now, I understand why they might not necessarily want him to. That's led to some disappointing finishes the last 2 years with his shoulder. You have a rushing quarterback, like that's what you put yourself into. You have to accept some of that risk. So they just need to allow him to run a little bit more, I think, to help give this offense a little bit of a spark and open some things up, so when he gets his ball to these players, there can be some more efficiency from it and they can have more sustaining drives. But this offense just looks like a pile of poo right now. And I don't know that Rondale Moore's enough to fix that when he comes back, but there was a report from prior to game time that it's looking like it's going to be a little longer for Rondale Moore anyways. So, once again, something that I've already expressed as far as Arizona, this may be an offense that looks much better in the second half of the season than it does in this first half of the season. And if you are in a league where there's a lot of trading, and if you're in a league that quarterbacks somehow get traded, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to trade Kyler for somebody, like in a package deal, kind of swapping a few players. And yeah, that's it for the Arizona offense as a whole, and Kyler Murray. Not feeling good about having him as my QB1, but totally relieved with what I've gotten in these first 2 weeks at the end of the day. Then, as far as the running backs goes, I said at the top, James Conner not looking like a long-term injury, might be short-term. Now, Eno Benjamin is the clear number 2 running back on this team when James Conner's healthy. He may also be the clear number 2 when James Conner's not healthy. I would expect this, based on what I gathered from the usage, which I was following this game pretty closely as far as the play calling goes, and I would expect it to be some sort of 60-40 with Eno maybe getting the edge on the targets, maybe. Looks pretty even, though, if you count the amount of time that James Conner was in there, and Eno Benjamin being the number 2 during that period of time. So, yeah, I think Darrell Williams gets the edge there for me out of the 2. Just like James Conner, I'm not dying to have the running back for the Cardinals. Much like I said, I think it's totally reliant on the touchdown for them. But nice showing from Darrell Williams there. And then Zach Ertz, liked him this week in this matchup. And, yeah, I mean, for as long as they're missing guys on that offense, this is always a possibility for him. So a good week for him, especially full PPR for Ertz. And Marquise Brown, this is why he's going to constantly be somewhere higher in my rankings than how comfortable I feel with it. He is the de facto wide receiver 1 there for the time being. And Greg Dortch, I'm still not just outright buying it. Not somebody I really want to have a roster spot open for on my team as far as season-long upside. But if you're in a pinch early, there have been quite a few injuries. And based on how those injuries are spread, compared to how players were drafted, I have seen some teams out there who have been absolutely decimated from the injuries. So he is a potential spot start kind of guy based on his ending production these first 2 weeks. And if you, for some reason, had faith in A.J. Green, I had some faith in him. I'm not making fun of you. If you are one of the few, I think he's pretty much proven in these first 2 weeks that he's not going to get you a lot of yards, and it's just going to come down to getting that touchdown, and he's not very reliable. On to Vegas. Derek Carr, solid, good week there as far as fantasy goes. Josh Jacobs, I don't remember what the attempts were last week. I did say I thought this team would get to a bit of a focus on the ground. They seemed to have a little bit more of a focus on rushing that ball, at least early-ish in this game. This offense, I don't think exactly has an identity yet. I do think they'll get there, but I'm not going to guarantee it with this head coach, and it seems like his identity has altered to some extent, at least with his running back usage, compared to what it looked like in New England. So I don't want to make any sweeping conclusions on things, because I do think that Josh Jacobs could have like I like his upside in terms of if this offense figures things out, there could be quite a few touchdown opportunities that he could fall his way into, and he's a decent running back on the ground. So we'll see. And Matt Collins was able to take advantage of the fact that they just absolutely shut down Davante Adams. I don't think that'll be the first week. Matt Collins he's an interesting, tall, big prospect kind of guy. So not somebody I'm going onto the waiver wires for. Hunter Renfrow, would be concerned. I think I said after the last week I would be concerned. So yeah, still concerned. But you do like the target share. The amount of targets there this week. There will be better weeks, but he is not a start it and forget kind of guy. He wasn't quite drafted like that, so that's good. Darren Waller had the kind of week that I think we can kind of expect from him this season. Got the touchdown, so that's good. And not much more to say there. You're still just playing him. Here's where this is a little bit more, I always forget his name. The head coach's tight end output. Foster Moreau getting in there 12 targets to the tight ends. That feels more, we'll just say New England-esque there. And unfortunately for Adams, just kind of got shut out by Arizona. Saves the day with the touchdown. So that's always nice to see on a bad day. There's a bit of a failsafe with having an offense that's not going to stall out so much that they can't get touchdowns like Houston type offense. So you got that going for you. Thank you so much. Feel free. If you have any questions about any games, specifically any players and what my thoughts are on them for the other games, just shoot that in the comments, and I'd be happy to get back to you the first chance that I get. Other than that, take care, have a wonderful rest of your day, and goodbye.